Cyrus the Great died 529 BC. Away up in the mountains of Asia there lived a tribe of farmers called Persians. They were a proud, hard-working people, and though they could not read or write, they told many stories of the early days of their people. They were religious people, and they had a great prophet called Zoroaster who had taught them there was an evil spirit called Ahriman, who always tried to make them do wrong, but that their god, Achaemenid, loved good and would protect and help them if they were honest and truthful and obedient. They were very proud of Zoroaster and his teaching, and by following him they became a good and great nation. When they learned to write, they collected Zoroaster's sayings and wrote them in a book which was called the Avesta, and it became the holy book of the religion, as the Bible is the holy book of the Christians. The Persians were not a free people, but were ruled over by a nation called the Medes, who lived in the land that lay towards the north. There were many different tribes among the Persian people, and one of them, a small tribe called the Anshan tribe, was ruled at the time of which this story tells by a young chief called Cyrus. He was a brave and good young man, and he longed to make his people into a great nation. He made the Persians see that they would be much stronger if they were united into one nation instead of divided into a lot of quarreling tribes. They listened to his words and saw that he was right, and at last they agreed to join together and make Cyrus king over all Persia. The king of the Medes was frightened when he saw how strong Cyrus had become, and he took an army and came to punish him for making himself king of all the Persians without his leave. But Cyrus fought against him, defeated his army and captured him, and so freed his people from the rule of the Medes and became king of the Medes as well as of the Persians. He was not a cruel conqueror, and instead of making his prisoners into slaves, as was the custom of those days, he set them free and allowed them to go back to their homes. He promised that if they settled down quietly under his rule, he would be a good king, and they were wise enough to obey him. He was a great and wise man, and under his rule the kingdom of the Medes and the Persians became rich and strong. Cyrus was an ambitious man, and he wanted to build up a great empire, so he set to work to train his soldiers and make a very fine army. Most of the men were armed with bows and arrows, and he made them practice shooting until they became the best bowmen in the world. They learned to shoot at enemies a long distance away, and when they stood in a great mass and shot at the people against whom they were fighting, their arrows came down out of the sky on the heads of their enemies like a great storm of rain. He also had some men who were horsemen, and they were trained to ride in after the bowmen had shot their arrows, and kill or take prisoners all the men who had not been killed already by the arrows. When the nations round Persia heard how strong Cyrus' army was, they joined together to fight him, because they felt that if he attacked them one by one they would probably be beaten. The kings of Babylon, Lydia, and Egypt all agreed to join together against him, as well as some smaller chiefs. But Cyrus heard of their plans and decided to go quickly and fight them before their armies could get together. He marched first against the most famous of them all, Croesus, king of Lydia. Croesus was known all over the world for his riches, and even now when people want to tell you that someone is very rich, they say he is as rich as Croesus. Perhaps the wealth of his people had made them soft and lazy. Anyway, when Cyrus came, they could not stand up against his army, and in a very short time Croesus was defeated and taken prisoner, and his land became part of Cyrus' empire. Croesus came to Cyrus' court and was treated as an honorable prisoner, and he was astonished when he saw how generous Cyrus was and how many presents he gave away. He asked Cyrus if he would not soon become very poor if he gave away so much of his riches. Cyrus asked him how much wealth he thought he would have if he kept all his riches instead of giving them away, and Croesus mentioned a huge sum of money. Then Cyrus made up his mind to teach Croesus a lesson. He wrote letters which he sent round his empire, asking his people to send him money to carry on his wars. After a time the messengers came back bearing with them the gifts of the people, and Cyrus soon had a great pile of gold far larger than the sum Croesus had mentioned. He told Croesus that if he had not been generous he would have been hated by his people, but as it was they loved him and were glad to give him money when he needed it. After Cyrus had made himself master of the kingdom of Lydia, he turned against Babylon. It was ruled over by a king called Belshazzar. His capital city, Babylon, was so strong and had such high walls that he thought he was safe from Cyrus' army. But he was too sure of himself. He felt so safe that when the Persians drew near the city he made a great feast for his nobles. The story of the feast is told in the Bible in the book of Daniel, chapter 5. In the midst of the feast a very frightening thing happened. Suddenly a man's hand appeared writing some strange words on the wall. The king rose up in terror, asking if someone could tell him the meaning of what had been written. The prophet Daniel came forward and told him that it meant that God was going to overthrow his kingdom. That very night the Persians broke into the city and captured it, and the great land of Babylon with all its splendid cities became part of Cyrus' empire. When Cyrus entered Babylon, he found there captive slaves from many nations. Among these slaves were the prophet Daniel and a large number of his people, the Jews. Cyrus was sorry for these captives who were longing to go back to their homes. You can read in the Bible in Psalm 137, one of the songs the captives had made, telling of their sadness and of their longing to see their homeland again. So Cyrus made a great proclamation saying that all the captive slaves might go home again. You can imagine what great rejoicing there was. The story of the return of the Jews to Jerusalem is told in the book of Ezra in the Bible. Cyrus was not only a great warrior, he was also a wise ruler. So long as he was king, his people were well governed and had good laws. He was just and faithful, and the people were kept safe from evildoers. So his land grew prosperous and the people were happy. But he did not live very long after he conquered Babylon. Up in the north of his empire were some wild tribes who were troubling his people. So he went to fight them and restore order, and during the fight he was killed. His people were very sad when they heard the news. His soldiers brought his body home to the beautiful capital city of Persepolis, which Cyrus had built, and there they buried him in a magnificent tomb and mourned over him for many days.